With a deficit in billions, rising inflation and Brexit on the horizon, just what will Spreadsheet Phil be pulling out of the hat? Welcome to a budget special of Tip TV Politics. Coming up on the programme, Sam Dumitriu from the Adam Smith Institute talks Brexit in the budget. We look in focus at child refugees with Josie Naughton, co-founder and CEO of Help Refugees, and Alastair Russell of Save the Children UK. Policy Network's Charles Cadywould offers us a glimpse of what a Labour budget would look like. Talking on social care, Adam Roberts, the head of economics for the Health Foundation. And to talk T-levels, Mark Dawe, Chief Executive of the Association of Employment and Learning Providers. And on the sofa throughout the programme, Chief Economist at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Julian Jessop, and the Social Market Foundation's Kathryn Petrie. Hello and welcome to Tip TV Politics with me, Rob Double. In our first and last spring budget, and no, I'm not being melodramatic. In the autumn statement last year, Chancellor Philip Hammond outlined that after 2017, there will only be one budget in the autumn. So we thought we'd make the most of the occasion, from T-levels to a Brexit preparation fund, or as most papers have been calling it, the Brexit war chest. We've got a flavour of what to expect tomorrow afternoon. So let's start first with the overall tone of the budget leading up to Brexit. The economy has performed better than expected, am I right?
Yes, that's right. And not only that, regardless of the state of the economy, the public finances have been improving as well. Corporation tax receipts have been better than expected. And welfare spending has been under better control as well. So it's not just the strength of the economy, there does seem to be an underlying improvement in the public finances too.
I mean, Sam, let's just look at this budget. What has been, the one thing you can't ignore is the fact that in a few weeks' time we're going to be triggering Article 50 and all the turbulence that's going to come with that. What's been the impact of Brexit on this budget?
Well, I think that the Chancellor will want to have a budget that gives him a little bit of leeway if there was to be a large economic shock. Now, I don't really think he needs to do that because I think the Bank of England clearly has shown that it's able to step in if things get too hairy. So I think the idea that he needs to have like a bit in reserve if he wants to stimulate the economy after Brexit is kind of a mistake, and it's kind of not what the focus should be. But it's good nonetheless that he would be not spending down future growth as George Osborne did and then found out the future growth was lacking and then we had higher deficits than we previously expected. I think it's good that he's not doing that, but I don't think he'll really need to be, storing up a war chest just in case he wants to splurge on stimulus when the Bank of England clearly has shown that it's able to calm markets as it did on June 24th.
Okay, well, Kathryn, obviously Philip Hammond did his circuit around the politics shows on Sunday, saying this is not going to be a giveaway budget. In your opinion, is Philip Hammond right to be saving and not spending?
Yeah, I think it comes down to what is he going to spend this money on if there is economic uncertainty. Just because he's got a war chest of however much doesn't mean he will spend it on stimulating the economy right there and now. It means that in 2020 maybe he wants to invest more in long-term infrastructure. That spending can be used in any way he sees fit at the time. It doesn't need to be in case of economic uncertainty. It could be that, great, we're going through some good years, let's help things along the way. I think that's what it comes down to. It's not one or the other.
Julian, I mean, Philip Hammond went on about the government having over £1.7 trillion worth of debt and a deficit of £60 billion this year. Is that an important focus, that the government needs to be paying off this deficit? Is that the right approach?
I think that's right. I think, of course, those are real numbers, those are actual numbers now. The so-called 60 billion war chest is just a hypothetical number based on the difference between the government's own deficit targets, which it can change at will, and some people's estimates of what the public finances are going to be like over the next few years. We know how dubious some forecasts can be. So I don't think it is 60 billion tucked away under the mattress somewhere. And even if it is spent, then that's money that could have been used to pay down the deficit. So I think it's right to focus on what you think the priorities should be based on the current fiscal numbers, rather than some forecast of what they might be in a few years' time.
Well, I mean, why is Philip Hammond doing it then? Why has Philip Hammond pulled out this £60 billion figure and is waving it around the TV studios?
Well, I'm not quite sure he's endorsed the figure of 60 billion. Indeed, I'd be surprised if it is precisely 60 billion. That's various people's estimates of what the OBR is going to come up with during the budget. I suspect it could be a lot less than that, or it could be a lot more. The key point being, it's just a forecast. It's not a real pot of money that we know is available now. And I think, as Stephanie was saying, if you are going to focus decisions on tax and spending, pick the right priorities. Do what you think is right, not based on a forecast of the future, but what you think is right now.
Sam, I mean, let's humour the 60 billion figure for a moment, or 60 billion preparation fund, or as most commentators have been calling it, the 60 billion Brexit war chest. How valuable could that reserve, that fuel in the tank be going through Brexit?
Well, if we did just have 60 billion, which, I think Julian's pointed out that it's a bit silly to say so, but I think it would give us the opportunity for some productivity boosting tax reform. So looking at things like stamp duty, where it really gums up the housing market, prevents people from moving to areas where they're more economically productive. Things like corporation tax, which has a depressive effect on investment. If we move to something like a cash flow tax, where you were able to immediately expense your capital expenditures. Now that would probably cost a bit in the short term, but that would be the sort of productivity boosting thing that would raise wages in the long run. That I think should be the focus if there were such money. But I think we could probably do that in a sort of either a revenue neutral way, or we could do it funded through more spending cuts. So that's the sort of thing that I would like to see in this budget. I think it'd probably be a bad idea to do it in the March budget rather than the autumn budget, because you want to give firms more than a month and a half to prepare for these sort of big changes. And I think that's actually one good thing that Philip Hammond's done.
I mean, in terms of paying for some of the policies which are going to be coming out tomorrow, which is such as social care and the T levels, which we're going to talk about a bit later on the programme, it's been said that these are going to be funded and paid for by cuts in other areas of government. Kathryn, do we have any idea about where these cuts are going to be coming from yet?
No. It's, as always, isn't it? Department find more cuts, find more money. I think the social care money is coming from a fund that is just being brought forward, right? They're moving it from a year 2018, 17 to now. I mean, I don't know where the cuts will come from.
Yeah.
But should we be making more cuts is another question. Right?
Well, let's just talk about cuts, because Sam, in terms of tax reform and tax cuts, what's your opinion on, and should the Chancellor be looking at cutting any of the taxes in this budget?
Well, I think, first of all, he should be looking at sort of the big picture structural questions of our tax system. We have something like 15, 20 different taxes, and usually what happens is that we don't see the sort of big picture ones that we know sort of roughly about how they work. Instead, we see the sort of small ones raised. So last time we had insurance premium tax with George Osborne, I think, in his final budget. So you get those sort of taxes getting raised. I think what we really need is sort of like a big picture. So should corporation tax even exist? I think probably not. I think there's probably a lot better ways of finding that money. Similarly, should we be having taxes like stamp duty or inheritance tax? They seem to depress capital investment, and that's the sort of thing we want to be open to, hopefully. And yeah, I think those should be the priorities. And now they can be done in a revenue neutral way. But we should also be looking at, really going for, if we can find spending cuts wherever we can to sort of lighten the load on sort of low income workers by cutting things like national insurance.
Okay, well, one thing that Philip Hammond doesn't want to do is to do a George Osborne style, pull a rabbit out of the hat, here's a flashy new policy. And one of the reasons it's speculating that he doesn't is because he wants to make a big thing of the fact that there's going to be a single fiscal event every year. Kathryn, what is your view on the idea of just moving to one single budget a year?
I think it has its pros and its cons. I think main pros, we don't want tax changes a month before the new tax year. I think that is the reason it's happening. I think it's a good thing. We're still going to have OBR statements in the spring. It's not like we're only going to one main point of what's happening. We're still going to have that spring statement in a way. So I think it's just a flipping of dates. I don't think it's got as much of an impact on the cons as some people may suggest. I think it's a good thing.
Okay, Julian, is that something you'd agree with?
Well, I think 2 points. First of all, the fewer budgets, the better, because no political chancellor can resist the opportunity to tinker. And tinkering almost always means more spending rather than less. So there's a ratchet effect. But the second point is I wonder actually whether even one budget per year is too many. And once you've got the basics of the tax system right, got a low level of government spending, a low level of taxation, let the economy get on with it. And even one budget a year might be putting too much emphasis, too many opportunities for the Chancellor to fiddle with things.
Well, that's food for thought. We'll leave that there and move on to our next issue. Thank you for Sam Dumitriu from the Adam Smith Institute for coming on. Let's move now on to social care. there is an expectation that the Chancellor will give an emergency injection of cash, reportedly £1.3 billion over the next 2 years, to councils to help fund social care. Joining us now is Adam Roberts, Head of Economics at the Health Foundation. Adam, how much extra funding do you think is required for the social care system to really stabilise?
So that's a really interesting question. It's important to note that over the previous 5 years, whilst NHS funding has been protected, we've actually seen a fall in total social care funding around 9% in 5 years. So there's been real pressures, and we're seeing far fewer people receiving care than they did in 2010. There's a number of estimates around about how much social care would need to keep pace with where we are now. They tend to be in the region of about an extra $1 billion to $2 billion for next year, just to keep pace with where we are. But it's really important to note that those are low estimates and they are best case scenarios, and actually would only keep where we are now, so do nothing to address the fact that we're currently seeing 400,000 fewer people receiving care than they did 5 years ago.
And in terms of a long-term demand and the increase on demand on social care with an ageing population, how severe do you see it, how the demand increasing over the next few years?
The best estimate around the demand pressures are about 4% a year in real terms. It's important to note that there has been new funding announced for social care in the original Comprehensive Spending Review in 2015, updated very recently to allow councils to raise money through the precept. But that additional money still lags behind the 4% a year pressures. So even with the new funding, just staying still looks really difficult, which is why even with that extra money, we're still looking at a gap definitely over $1 billion for next year.
And what are your thoughts? Philip Hammond on his tour of the TV studios this weekend said the phrase, "It's not about money. It's not just about money," rather, referring to social care. What do you make of that statement?
That's a really important point. It isn't about money, but I think all government departments, all areas of public spending are having to make substantial savings as we try to ultimately move towards a balanced budget. The problem is that social care has been facing this 4% growth in demand every year and has seen a dramatic reduction in their budget over the last 5 years. We are seeing far fewer people receiving care that they need than they did 5 years ago.
Okay.
If we want to improve that situation, if we want to improve the life of people who need that care, then we do need investment pretty quickly. Okay,
Adam Roberts from the Head of Economics at the Health Foundation, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Julian, we've heard, it's speculative of course, but that the government will be giving councils up to £1.3 billion over the next 2 years as sort of an emergency injection of cash to help stabilise social care. How is that cause to celebrate, do you think?
Well, in general, I'm against increased government spending, as you might anticipate, but I think this could be an exception. The social care budget has been squeezed, partly as a result of government decisions to ring-fence other forms of spending, particularly the NHS. But I think that's proved to be a false economy, because the reduction in social care spending has forced people instead onto the NHS. It's forced them into A&E wards. It's led to deterioration in the amount of support available for people suffering with mental health problems. So I think in the short term, there is a case for putting quite a big sticking plaster on this to fix it. But in the longer term, it isn't a solution. We can't just keep throwing money at this problem, because the demand is going to continue increasing steadily year by year. We have to think about more fundamental ways of reforming the way that we provide healthcare in this country, and I suspect that will involve less government involvement rather than more.
Oh, and Kathryn, you mentioned the long-term solution. The government is due to or expected to announce a long-term review into health and social care to provide this long-term solution. Do you feel that this could be, Philip Hammond bumping it into the long grass with this review, which will come out at some point in the future, and not much will happen about it?
You get that feeling in social care. It's happened before. We've had all parliamentary groups talking about this, and then nothing happens. We had the idea of a social care cap, which was supposed to be implemented in 2016, and then that was pushed to 2020, and who knows whether that will happen. I think that's one issue. It is an issue that affects long term, and we tend to shy away from those decisions at the moment. And I think maybe that's what's happening, but also there is a sense that people are really listening this time, and maybe this will be the opportunity to get things right.
Okay.
And to review the market itself. And one of the things we're pro is maybe the implementation of an insurance market for care. I think that's an interesting perspective.
Okay, right, we're going to have to leave that there because we're going on to our next policy announcement, which is, of course, education-based to do with T-levels. You never heard of them? Well, you shouldn't do. They haven't started yet, but a new policy announced tomorrow in the budget sees the government push for parity between academic and technical qualifications. Similar to academic A-levels, these T-levels will be graded A-star to E, but will come with a compulsory 3-month placement. The Chancellor has put £500 million towards 15 courses, with the first being introduced in 2018. And joining us now is Mark Dawe, Chief Executive of the Association of Employment and Learning Providers. Mark, thanks for coming on. Is parity between technical and academic qualifications a positive step forward in the eyes of employment and learning providers?
Absolutely, and we've always thought that actually many of the opportunities that young people have through apprenticeships or other skills training are far greater than some of the students that take an academic route, and I can give you many examples of those to show even now how that is the case.
I mean, in terms of how desperate businesses are for workers with technical skills, why hasn't the current system been able to provide it? What's your reading on that?
Well, I think a lot of the conversations up until now have been, are the programmes fit for purpose? Are they what employers want? There was the Richards Review, which said that actually some of the apprenticeship programmes need to be sort of rewritten to meet employers' needs, and groups of employers got together to write apprenticeship steps. And what we're seeing now, for example, are amazing degree apprenticeships where young people can go in at 18, be working from day one, get a degree as well as on-the-job training, and actually be in an amazing job before their friends who've gone to university are even into the workforce.
And in terms of the current system which is in place, I mean, there's 13,000 existing vocational qualifications, and this is hoping to streamline that. How complicated is the current system of vocational qualifications? Just give us an idea.
So you're talking, there's the apprenticeship programme, then there's the full-time programme, which often takes place in a classroom or workshop. And there are a wide range of qualifications, but if you turn up to your college, there's normally a full-time programme for construction skills or health and social care, and they'll be doing something like a BTEC or a Cambridge Technical. So there are a number of different qualifications you can do from different awarding bodies. The government's aim, stated aim at the moment, is to have one awarding body per route.
Okay. Mark Dawe, Chief Executive of the Association of Employment and Learning Providers, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Julian, is this about training and upskilling? Is it about making the workforce better and improving productivity? This big issue which has been on the backs of chancellors for God knows how many years.
Well, I think the key words here are level playing field. I think the government is actually very bad at deciding what sorts of education the economy needs. It's much better to leave the market to do it, to let people make free choices with equal funding, for example, for the so-called T-levels, as you would get for doing an A-level or going on to do a university degree, a more academic subject. So if the government can level the playing field and let people decide the best education for them on equal terms, and also provide more things like free schools, where again, people can decide what they think is best in response to market and price signals, rather than the government in Whitehall deciding.
Kathryn, this idea of improving productivity and giving people better opportunities in education has been a long failed ambition of many governments before this one. What's so different now? What gives anyone any hope that this is going to be any different?
I think the way the government are approaching this, they're talking about it seriously. We're going to fund it. We're going to give 15 routes. We're going to allow people to make easier decisions. If they want this career, here's the path to do it. And I think, without always mentioning Brexit, given Brexit and the economic skills uncertainty that might be in the future, we need to make sure that we have the young people there to fill those gaps.
I mean, 500 billion is the figure which is being bandied around in terms of 500 million, sorry, billion, we'd be so lucky, is the figure being bandied around about how this is going to be funded. Julian, is that going to be enough, £500 million, to really make this a success of this new policy?
Well, if you're assuming that the government is going to have to finance and deliver the whole educational system, then clearly 500 million is just a drop in the ocean. But if this is about making it easier for the private sector to deliver these solutions, for example, making it easier for parents and local businesses to get together and set up preschool to provide the sort of education and training that local businesses want, then that 500 million could actually go quite a long way because it would be leveraged by additional private sector finance. And I think it's more that sort of private sector route that we need to look to rather than the taxpayer funding all of this.
And is it, Kathryn, we've obviously spoken a lot about money and how is this going to be financed, when it in terms of education and training people up in local areas to do the skills which are needed in those areas by businesses, is it just about centralised financing, or is it something more about, localised efforts?
So I think localised efforts are definitely a need. So we have the apprenticeship levy, for instance. Will that be a regional thing? No, is the answer, but maybe it needs to be, and I think maybe the apprenticeship area needs looking at in more detail anyway. One major concern for us is not the way this is funded, it's the people that are involved in this. So we've seen an increase in those that go into university with vocational courses behind them, and whether this two-tier system of vocational versus academic will allow those people to still make that transition isn't clear yet.
Now, just how should the government be handling unaccompanied child refugees who are currently in Europe? The Dubs Amendment is named after its creator, Labour peer Lord Alf Dubs, who came to Britain himself as a child refugee before the Second World War. It's an added condition to the Immigration Act 2016, section 67 to be exact. It states that the UK will take unaccompanied refugee children that were already in the UK prior to the 20th of March 2016, the date of the EU-Turkey deal. This refers only to children who do not have any family in the UK and are on their own, and for it to be in the best interest of them to be brought into the UK. The amendment, however, didn't outline the number of children the UK had to take, but instead left that to be worked out by the government, who would talk to local authorities and see how many spaces were available in local areas. Last month, the government announced the number of children was 350, far lower than many both inside and outside of politics had expected. The issue is back in the House of Commons today through an amendment attached to the Children and Social Work Bill. Earlier, I spoke to Josie Naughton, co-founder and CEO of the organisation Help Refugees, currently in Parliament, and in the studio, Alastair Russell from Save the Children UK. And just before we came on to the show, we had heard the announcement that the government have defeated this amendment by 287 votes to 267. That's only 20 votes difference. But Josie Naughton, perhaps you can start. What, from your understanding, was this amendment really about today?
This amendment was really about protecting children. It was an amendment to the Child and Social Care Bill. And I think that the bottom line is that all children deserve to have the rights of the child upheld, no matter where they're from. And there's a particular group of children who are in Europe right now who are extremely vulnerable, and we have a duty to protect them. And unfortunately, politics got in the way of that today. But I think all the amazing organisations who've been campaigning to protect these children will keep going.
I mean, what's been the feeling? Obviously, the amendment has been defeated, so it's not going to go any further. But what's your reading of the mood in Parliament now regarding it?
I just came out from Parliament, actually, and it feels very polarised. People were very angry and upset that these children now have to wait an extremely long time before anything more can be done. We Help Refugees have issued legal proceedings against the Home Office on this very issue, and our final hearing date will be on June 19th. So there's still some light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
But yeah, it's a very sad day.
Okay, well, that's a good time to bring in Al Russell, who works for Save the Children UK. Al, how many children did your organisation hope the government would permit to bring in through the Dubs agreement?
Well, I think the key thing is actually not about numbers. It's about the best interests of the children. And in this case, what this amendment would have done, and what we think the government should do, is ensure that in every case when there's an unaccompanied child refugee who's in Europe, whose best interest it's in to be brought to the UK, we should ensure that there's a safe and legal route for them to be able to come. rather than them risking their lives with traffickers and people smugglers.
I mean, sure, but of course you were disappointed, or your organisation was also disappointed with the 350 figure which the government came up with.
Certainly we thought when the amendment was accepted last year, the spirit in which it was accepted was that the number specified, as the legislation says a number must be specified, would be more in line with the level of need we're seeing in France, Greece and Italy. And 350 did feel like a disappointingly low number to us, yeah.
I mean, Josie, in terms of your reading of the government's claim that there were no spaces available for more unaccompanied children, unaccompanied child refugees than the 350 figure that they've given, what's your reading of that? Do you think the government's right there?
No, we've worked very closely with a lot of local authorities, and that's a completely different story to what we hear. For example, Lewisham offered 22 places to house these children, and they only had one of those places taken up. And there's a similar story coming from a lot of local authorities all across the country. So what happened today in Parliament was really just about the government consulting with the local authorities again to see what room there was, and it seems a real shame that we're not even going to be able to do that now.
I mean, what's happened then? Well, I mean, obviously the government has said that it's consulted with local authorities to find out how much capacity there was, and it's come up with 350, which you're saying is completely inaccurate to what local authorities have been saying to you. So what's the government been doing which has caused this completely disaligned figure?
I think that there needs to be some investigation into what exactly that consultation consisted of. So, for example, we've spoken to some local authorities who said that it was, in fact, the part of the government that deals with adult refugees consulting with them on this issue, not the part that deals with child refugees. And there's certain parts of the consultation that aren't quite up to standards, so perhaps that's something that needs to be looked into.
OK, well, let's just talk about the situation in Calais, because Theresa May has ordered the Home Office to look into reports that children which were dispersed from the Calais camp have been returning back to the French port. Al, what's been going on here? Why are these children, if they are, going back to Calais?
Well, what we're seeing is, in general, the children that are going back to places like Calais are the children who made claims under the Dublin regulation to be reunited with family in the UK and had those claims rejected, either because they were family links that were seen to be too distant, or because there were errors in their application. But no information, in general, no information is given to children on why their claim's been rejected. And because this safe and legal route's been taken away from them, they see that they have no option other than to return to these camps and kind of throw in their lot with traffickers and people smugglers and try and get to the UK unsafely, rather than to engage with the authorities and get here through a legal route. So
there isn't really actually anything material there for them, or any guarantees there for them in Calais. They're just going because they don't know what else to do.
Exactly. And I was in Dunkirk a couple of weeks ago and was talking to a 13-year-old boy who said he had done exactly that. He'd had a claim to come and join his uncle in London, and his claim had been rejected. And he'd been in one of the children's centres in a safe, warm environment with adults caring for him, but had no hope of reaching his family in the UK because that claim had been rejected. So he saw that he had no option other than to return to a camp and try his luck.
I mean, let's talk. You've mentioned people trafficking now several times. Let's just talk about that. Josie, from your understanding, and Help Refugees understanding, is the issue of people trafficking deeply important to consider when talking about unaccompanied child refugees coming to the UK?
I think it's massively important. If there's no safe and legal route for children to come to the UK to be reunited with their family or just find sanctuary here, then they're pushed into the arms of people traffickers and smugglers. And I think it's really important to remember that the government themselves asked the Independent Anti-Slavery Commission to investigate this very thing, and the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner came back with a report saying that they did not advise that the Dove scheme was closed, and that in fact this would only push children into the arms of traffickers and people smugglers, and they seem to be going against a very report that they commissioned.
And obviously a Home Office report said that at least 95,000 unaccompanied child refugees are in Europe. Do you have any idea of where they are, what they're doing now?
They're all across Europe. There's many in France, there's many in Greece, there's many in Italy. In Greece, there are recorded over 2,000 unaccompanied children, and there's only officially 1,000 spaces in either shelters or camps for those children. So there's 1,000 children completely and utterly falling through the gaps. And once again, then they're only pushed into incredibly vulnerable situations if there's no official body to care for them.
I mean, what are they doing though? What is their day-to-day life like at the moment?
They're completely alone, so they're having to just find a way to survive. And in some cases, that might mean they're homeless. In other cases, that might mean that they're in very doing different kinds of work or being forced into. Some children are even slave labour in Greece. It's a massive problem, and no one really knows what's happening, and that's also the issue, because there's no one in charge of these children taking care of them.
Sure. I mean, Al, a lot of people say Britain, what I want for Britain to be doing is to be taking their fair share of refugees, of the refugees which are in Europe at the moment.
Yeah.
What is the fair share of refugees in terms of what Save the Children think? What should Britain be doing?
I think our assessment comes back to the idea of best interests. And we agree with the regulations that say that once refugees reach their first safe country, that's where they should claim asylum. But in many cases, there are people who reach other safe countries in whose best interest it is, particularly in the case of vulnerable, unaccompanied children, to come and be brought to the UK. So what we wanted to see today in Parliament, and what we want to see in general, is a system that ensures that if it is in the best interest of a child to be brought here to the UK, then that is possible when there's capacity to do it. And as Josie said, and as we've heard from local authorities, the capacity appears to be higher than what the Home Office has said. So we want to ensure that that capacity can be filled by the children that need it most.
OK, we're going to have to leave that there. Josie Naughton, co-founder and CEO of Help Refugees, and Al Russell, Parliamentary and Advocacy Officer for Save the Children UK. Now, tomorrow's budget isn't, of course, just a big day for Philip Hammond. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell will be laying out his vision for the British economy and holding the government to account across the dispatch box. But what do we know about what a Labour budget would actually look like? Joining us now is Charlie Cadywould from Policy Network. The commentary over the weekend was that Labour has a set of individually very popular policies, but together it doesn't make a coherent fiscal package. Is that a correct analysis, do you think?
I think that's right. I think on an individual basis, Labour does have some very popular policies. You think about things like raising the national minimum wage, renationalising the rail services, and there's many others where individually they're very popular. But there does seem to be a problem of credibility with the leadership. People just don't trust that Labour would be able to deliver those things without crashing the economy, I suppose.
And in terms of, John McDonnell has announced a number of very popular policies for the budget, but very light on where the money would come from. Am I right in thinking that, there isn't much in terms of credibility of where the money is going to come from to finance all of these big policy announcements?
Well, I tend to see Labour's set of policies in sort of three categories. There are some things which are essentially taking us back to 2015. Think about things like plugging the gaps in social care and reversing the cuts to personal independence payments and employment support allowance. Those things they do seem to have funded and have been able to show that they would reverse certain tax cuts in order to pay for them. But that's hardly radical. That's just taking us back to 2015. You then think about other things like bringing back the educational maintenance allowance, abolishing tuition fees, and those aren't funded. So there's certainly a gap there. And then you think about even wider, more radical things like the supposed 500 billion stimulus, and there just isn't the money there as far as I can tell.
I mean, Julian, in terms of how Labour are going to be attacking the Conservative budget tomorrow, John McDonnell to the PLP this week talked about chronic low pay, the rigged economy on tax, ensuring the economy works for women. Do you agree that the electorate just simply don't see the leadership as being able to offer a credible package for the economy?
Well, a lot of these policies are popular. They do sound like common sense. If you talk about the gender pay gap, for example, I think that's popular as a concept with a lot of people. But if you look beyond the headlines actually a lot of the things that are said are simply economically illiterate. If we take the gender pay gap, for example, there's no evidence that men and women are paid any differently for doing the same job at the same levels of experience. What does happen is that men and women, for various reasons, including their own free choices, end up doing different jobs that happen to pay differently. Now, it's not clear to me that government regulation is the solution to that problem, if there is a problem at all. And it's a similar picture across all of Labour's policies. I mean, they're superficially attractive, but they typically involve more regulation, more public spending, and that will be financed either by higher borrowing or, I think more likely, higher taxes on businesses that create jobs. And ultimately, the best way to deal with poverty is not to throw money at people, but to get them into jobs that ultimately will pay better if the economy is working in a more healthy way.
I mean, in terms of, Kathryn, in terms of weaknesses in the budget, which is going to be announced tomorrow, from what we know about, what are the key things that Labour could be attacking the Conservatives on in terms of the economy and in terms of supporting the just about managings, as they keep on going on about?
Yeah, so the previous statement didn't help the people in the middle. We know that these people are slightly being ignored, and maybe Philip Hammond isn't going far enough, but that's not what Labour seem to be doing. And I would like to add that women are actually more impacted by budget cuts, and that was the point that I think John McDonnell was trying to make, was that budgets are unfair on women rather than men, and I think that's what the Labour Party were trying to do with that point. It wasn't just about gender pay gaps.
Right. I mean, but in terms of where the government is particularly weak, do you see it as the stuff about universal credit, the disability payments, which have been in the news the past 3 or 4 weeks? What if you were to pinpoint something which the Labour Party could really take the Conservative Party to town on in this budget, what would you pick?
So I think the disability cuts, these the self-assessments people go through, people are compassionate about that, and it's an issue for them regardless of where they vote. And so I think that's one issue that they could really go in on.
I mean, Charlie, in terms of Jeremy Corbyn in particular, obviously as the head of the Labour Party alongside John McDonnell, he will be in the spotlight tomorrow. He had a bit of a nightmare this week in terms of calling for transparency for Philip Hammond with regards to his tax affairs, only for it to backfire on him and him to become the story. Is that a further indication that, in terms of the Labour Party leadership, in terms of any financial management whatsoever, they're just not seen as credible or trustworthy?
I think that's right. I think it was a political own goal. I don't think that there's any suggestion that Jeremy Corbyn actually did anything wrong with his tax returns. Indeed, I think some of the media probably jumped the gun a little bit. But it was a political own goal. It was completely unnecessary for them to put themselves into that situation. And it is a shame, I think, that the Labour Party are unable to get past these small issues and focus on some of the big problems that the government is facing. I mean, we have a huge crisis in social care. We're the only advanced economy to have economic growth, but at the same time falling wages. And actually, there are many aspects of the government's manifesto that are now in tatters. I mean, membership of the single market, deficit reduction, a number of other things where the government should be taken to task, but they're not.
Right, we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. But thank you, Julian, Kathryn, and Charlie. Now, we're out of time this week, but don't forget you can find videos, comment, and much more on our Facebook page and on Twitter @TipTVPolitics. Join me again next week for all the latest news in politics. Until then, from me, Rob Double, have a great week. Goodbye.